Hey everyone, I'm going to show you how to rebuild a carburetor. This carb actually is out of a Suzuki DRZ400S. So they've been making the same bike for about 20 years now. This is a single carburetor, 36 millimeter Mikuni, and I believe they've been using the same carburetor for the entire run. So I'm going to step you through taking it apart, what to inspect, and then how to put it back together and get it ready to put back in the bike. I'm also going to go over a couple of carb rebuild kits. So Moose makes some really good rebuild kits with all the parts that you need, new jets, gaskets, all that. I'm also going to use an air cutoff valve rebuild kit if it needs it. So I'll show you that as we work through it. So before I get the job started, I always want to have all my parts laid out and make sure I have everything I need to complete the job. So I'm going to open up the carburetor rebuild kit, make sure everything's in there, and make sure I'm ready to get the job completed where I don't need to like stop and order parts. So one thing I like to do when I'm doing a job like this or any other kind of technical job is I will stop and take pictures with my cell phone. It doesn't cost anything, and you can always reference it when you're putting it back together. Even if you've done this 1,000 times, I still take pictures. It's just a smart thing to do. So you want to take a picture of all 6 corners. Alright, now that I took pictures, I'm going to pull the hoses off, because I know how those go back with the photos. So I'll set those aside. Now the first thing I want to do is to remove the bowl. There's 4 Phillips screws right here. You want to be extra careful not to strip these out. They can get seized in there pretty easily. So when you're using a Phillips screwdriver, you want to apply a lot of force when you're trying to get those cracked loose. So there you go. So you want to get all 4 of these off. One trick I've learned over the years is if you have a stubborn Phillips screw, you want to get one of these 90-degree screwdrivers, and they really apply a lot of leverage. And this particular one from Craftsman bites the Phillips screws particularly well, and it doesn't likely strip out any screws. So I use it when I feel like any of these screws are going to be temperamental. So now that I got those cracked loose by hand, I'll use a power tool just to speed up the process. Okay, got all those out. This is your idle, so I just leave that attached for now. Now I can remove the bowl. Oh yeah, look at that. Gross. So gasoline has ethanol in it, and when that ethanol dries out, it turns into like a thick, sappy kind of varnish, and that's what clogs up your carburetor. So that's a huge problem with carburetors, is the modern fuels they use are have a lot of ethanol in them, and it tends to go bad. Even I've seen within a couple weeks, carbs will clog up with that ethanol in the fuel. So we got a float right here. We're going to remove that next. Since I don't want to risk stripping the screw out, I'm going to use my 90-degree Phillips screwdriver. With a lot of pressure, try to crack that loose. There we go. Nice and easy. Okay, that's off. I want to pile all my parts in little individual piles, so I'll probably put these Phillips screws in the bowl for now. So we got your float and your float needle right there. So this guy you'll want to replace every single time because they're problematic as far as leaking, so just go ahead and replace it. Next I'll remove the float needle housing here. Okay. So there's a Phillips screw holding that in place. Now that I got that screw out, so I'm going to grab a pair of pliers and pull that out. And you can see that this one was actually missing an O-ring right here. And I'll show you how that goes back together. And actually, I'll show you the old one compared to the new one. The new one's got an O-ring right there. So that's one thing that's not right. Next, you're going to pull out your jets. Alright, so I'm going to pull out the main jet right here, the flat screwdriver. And we're going to note what size it is. The jets will say what size it is on there in very small text. This one's a 142.5. So we're going to compare that with the microfiche and make sure it's the right size jet. And then we're also going to compare that to the jet that comes in the new rebuild kit. And this one is a 142.5 as well. So we're going to go ahead and replace that. This plastic piece right here around the main jet holder, I'll pull that off. Next, we're going to do the choke jet. And we're also going to compare that with the microfiche, but also compare it with the new one that came in the rebuild kit. And they're both 62.5. So that's good. So next, we're going to remove the pilot jet. And we're going to compare the size of that, and it's written on the side, I believe it's a 22.5. We're also going to make sure that the kit came with the right style of jets. Sometimes the kits aren't perfect and they're not, you know, you got to compare the old with the new. So they're both 22.5, so we're good there. So I'm going to remove the main jet holder. It's an 8mm. I got a T-handle here. Get that loose, pull that out. That's super dirty, and there's an O-ring right here we're going to replace. You can see how dirty that looks compared to when I get it out of the ultrasonic cleaner. Now that we're good on this side, I'm going to remove the diaphragm cap right here and pull a diaphragm and needle out. So we got two Phillips screws here. 1, 2. And be careful when you're doing this part because there is a spring in there that can end up somewhere in the corner of the room. So I hold that down and slowly remove that off. Here we have the cap, spring, and your diaphragm. You want to pull this out gently and not rip this diaphragm. So in this carburetor, it's so gunked up that that slide is actually stuck. So I'm going to gently pry it and try not to crack it, try to get it out of there. If it's stuck bad enough, I might actually put the whole thing in the ultrasonic cleaner and try to get it freed up. So I'm going to pry on this with a screwdriver, but I'm going to be extra careful and I'm going to wrap it in a rag. I'm going to gently pry on that diaphragm. See if I can get it to, oh, there it goes. So pull that out. There's a lot of varnish. You can look at the varnish and rings on the needle. So we're going to pull that out and replace it. The way you replace the needles, you pull out this white plastic keeper with the spring. Make sure you don't lose that spring. So you pull that out and the needle will come right out. You want to make sure you note the order of the washer, the plastic spacer, the E-clip, and the other washer. So we want to make sure all that's put back exactly the same way. Alright, so the needle goes through a needle guide down there in the carburetor. So that's really important to pull out and get clean. So I'm going to use an Allen wrench that's roughly the right size, and I'm not going to push on it too hard because you don't want to damage that part. So I'm going to see if it comes out with a little bit of pressure. And no, it doesn't. So I'm going to soak that in the hot tank and see if it frees up in the ultrasonic cleaner. We have a jet in here. so I'm going to pull that out with a tiny flathead screwdriver. You got to make sure you apply a lot of pressure so that you don't strip that jet out. And if you feel like it's going to be too hard to pull out and it's resisting, then don't just break it. Try to get it hot in an ultrasonic cleaner or in some boiling water, and that might help free it up. Yeah, so that's not coming out, so I'm going to soak it in the hot tank first and see if that helps. So these two holes are your air jets controlling how much air goes by the main jet and the pilot jet. So we're going to make sure that these are cleaned out as well. All right, so next I'm going to remove the air cutoff valve cover. There's 2 Phillips screws there. That one. That one. There's also a spring there, so you got to be really careful. So I put my thumb over it, remove the 2 Phillips screws, and then slowly release the pressure on the cover. Sometimes this is stuck, so I gotta maybe pry it a little bit with your finger. There we go. We got a spring in there and a diaphragm that looks like it's in pretty good shape. We might just replace that anyways. So I'm going to remove the idle screw all the way. I'm going to note the order of this spring and washer. So you want to make sure you put it back together the same way. So the next step would be to remove the plug that is denying access to the fuel mixer screw. And the way we do that is you drill a tiny little hole with a drill bit, and then you screw in a wood screw until it basically kind of gets wedged in there, and then use that to pull out this copper plug. So I'm going to drill a pilot hole in this plug right here, just ever so carefully. And you don't want to drive the drill bit all the way through because you're going to hit that mixer screw. So when you're about ready to break through to the other side of this little cap right here, you want to just be extra careful not to be having applying too much pressure. Let us go slow. There we go. We got a nice little hole right here. So what I'm going to do next, so I found a small wood screw. I'm going to drive this into that hole, and it's going to basically bite into that brass plug so that I could use that to pry and pull that plug out. So now that I got it bitten into that material. All right, so I'm going to show you a trick to getting this out. So what I do is I take a needle nose pair of pliers, I grab that screw and I'll tap on it with a hammer to get that part out of there. So you can see how I got that plug out. Pretty handy. So next we're going to remove the pilot mixer screw. And what you want to do is you want to screw this all the way in, counting the turns to know exactly where it is set at. So 1/2, 1 turn, 1.5, 2 turns, 2 1/4, or roughly 2 1/4, and you don't want to jam it in there. So that's where your pilot mixer screw is set at, 2 1/4 turn. Now you pull it all the way out, and the mixer screw has a spring, a metal washer, and a tiny O-ring. The washer and the tiny O-ring usually get stuck in there, so I'll show you how to pull those out. So what I do is I take a piece of safety wire and I bend a tiny 90-degree bend on the very tip of it. And I use that as a tiny hook to go in there and grab that washer and O-ring. So get in there, hook on it, and there you go. So that washer and O-ring go on the fuel mixer screw, So we have O-ring, washer, and spring, and that's how that goes. The new kit came with new ones of those, so we're gonna just replace it. But I just wanted to show you the way the orientation is. So next I'm gonna remove the choke here. We have a tiny E-clip. I'm gonna remove that with a tiny screwdriver, trying not to fling that across the room. So we got that E-clip. We have a washer. And this should pull right out. Now I can attempt to remove the choke plunger here. And one of the easiest ways I've found to do that is with a long needle nose pliers. Bite the edges, get that turned, and just rotate that, pull that out. There we go. This is your throttle position sensor. I leave that in. I don't want to mess with that because it's set from the factory. So I'm going to put everything in a piece of Tupperware to get it loaded into the ultrasonic cleaner. If you are confused about what goes where, take pictures of everything. Makes your job a lot easier. So I'm going to throw all the little pieces into a piece of Tupperware here. I like to remove the O-ring before the cleaner. That way it gets all that surface a little bit cleaner. You also want to remove the drain bolt screw right here so that you get solvent going through it. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and load these in the ultrasonic cleaner. And one thing I do is with the float, I don't want that floating, I want that submerged, so I'll put it in the bowl here and I'll put it upside down so it actually stays in the solution. So I'll just drown that, cover it, and I'll let it go for about 45 minutes. Alright, I'm going to check on the carburetor. I'm going to see if I can break loose a couple of those things that were being stubborn earlier. And then I'm also going to take the carb out, take a look at it, and flip it. And then run it for a little bit longer. So, here, this guy is piping hot. And I'm going to see if I can push that one piece through. Yep, comes right through. And there's that part I was trying to get out earlier. And that's like a guide for the needle. So you got to make sure you put that back in the right way. And I'll show you how to do that later. And in here there was a jet. I'm going to see if I can get that loose now. That is hot. Oh, there we go. So patience pays off. Let it get hot and cleaned out, and you can get that part out. So there we go. It's just another tiny jet. So now I'm going to run this, and you can already see how clean that is. Look at that. Spotless. But I'm going to run it for a little bit longer. Might as well. Just set it in like that. We're going to run it for about another 15 or 20 minutes. That's good. Look how clean that is. It's like jewelry. Absolutely beautiful. So the most important thing when you're cleaning carburetors is that they are clean. Clean, clean, clean. So I'm going to rinse these off, and I'm going to take compressed air and I'm going to blow through all the ports and all that. And I'm going to probably end up actually spraying some brake clean through all these passageways and make sure they're all cleared out. We got everything clean, dry, laid out. I'm going to do an inventory here, make sure nothing's missing. And we're going to go ahead and start putting her back together. Okay, I got the carb cleaned out. I blew through all these ports, made sure everything looks super clean. I actually used a flashlight and looked in all of these passageways and just tried to get a good look at everything, make sure everything's cleaned out. So like I said before, clean is key. You want it as clean or close to as clean as a brand new carb. That way you'll get the best results. So I'm going to start on this end right here. The first thing I'm going to put in is this needle guide. You got to make sure you put it in with the opened end facing down. There's kind of a close end and more of an open end. So the open end you want to go into the body of the carburetor, and that's going to be held in by the main jet holder. Sometimes that needle guide is kind of hard to get in there, so I kind of just tap it a little bit and try to get it to go in. There we go. So I'll tighten that with an 8mm wrench. Okay. Like that. Next I'm going to put in the main jet. And you got to make sure you don't confuse that with the choke jet. So the main jet on this one's going to be a 142.5, and that's the one you want to go here. That. And then I'll go ahead and put that other jet right there. I want to make sure those are nice and snug, not too tight. Okay. Next I'll put in the new pilot jet. That goes down. Next I'm going to put in the new float needle housing. I like to put a little WD-40 on that O-ring. Just a little bit. Push it down. And then you want to install the new screw that holds that in place. That. Then I'll do the float. With the new float needle. So I will put the new float needle on the float here, and that goes on that little hook right there, or that tab. And I like to put a little WD-40 on that too, because sometimes those will stick a little. That'll cause the carburetor to overflow. I'll set that on there, and I'll put the screw back that came out of that hole right here to hold this bar in place that holds the float. So right there. Okay. Next I'll install the new fuel mixture screw. And as you might remember, the number of turns is about 2 1/4. So I'm actually going to put that in. There's a spring, a washer, and an O-ring. So that's the order of the parts on the fuel mixture screw. So I'll go ahead and put that in. I'll screw it all the way in until it seats. Okay, and then I'll back it out 2 1/4 turn. 1, 2 1/4. And that's just your baseline. So when you get the bike running, you're going to want to tune the carburetor using that fuel mixer screw. So now that I got everything in here assembled, I'm going to go ahead and install the float bowl with the new gasket. And that sits right there. You want to make sure that this groove right here is free of any like debris, or sometimes there's old sealant, stuff like that. So just make sure it's all cleaned out. So I'll put the gasket in the groove here, like that. And that's just going to sit there. I'll turn the carburetor upside down, put it on like that. Okay. Then I can reinstall those 4 screws, and the kit came with new screws, so I'm going to go ahead and use the new screws. Okay, now that I referenced my phone pictures, I can get this assembled back the way it was before, which is really cool. And actually, before I do that, so I don't got this flopping around, I'm going to go ahead and screw back in the idle screw. So this is how you set your idle. So this screws into this part of the carburetor, and when it starts moving, that barely starts, that's when you just kind of leave it right about there. Okay, this bracket's going to go here. That screw. I try not to torque down on each screw like this one first. I try to torque them all down at the same time, like kind of back and forth.
Okay. That one, and then this one.
Go back and just, now we can torque them all down. Nice and even. Okay. The drain plug, go ahead and put that back in. Sometimes these get stripped out and you just want to get a new one. Depends on the rebuild kit, but sometimes they come with it, sometimes they don't. So that nice and tight. So next I'll go ahead and do the air cutoff. I got a new one of those. There. We're going to put those two new screws in there. So I hold it with my finger so it won't spring out of the way, and then get these screwed on. Alright, so I'm done with that side. I'm going to go ahead and put the choke plunger back in. And this one's pretty tricky because there's a tiny little ball bearing that holds this in place when you pull it out, and there's a tiny little spring in there. So make sure that spring is still in there and that the ball bearing fits in that little slot. Okay. So that's in there. I'm going to go ahead and get the plunger put back in. I'm going to put a little WD-40 on the threads to make my life a little easier. Do that first. Be careful you don't cross thread these plastic threads. They're kind of easy to cross thread, so just take your time. Make sure it doesn't feel like it's binding up and it goes in nice and smooth. So I'll use these pliers. Get in there and just give it a snug in the last little bit here. Okay, not too tight. That ball bearing fell out, so I'm going to put that back in. Okay, I'm going to spray in there with some WD-40. Go ahead and slide that back in. That. We got a washer and an E-clip, tiny little E-clip. Slide that on. I'll use a pair of pliers to pop that on there. And then we're going to check that. Okay, it stays there. Stays in, stays out. perfect. Next we'll put in that jet that came out over here by the diaphragm. I got the new one, I made sure it was the right one. Pop that in there with a tiny flathead screwdriver. Okay. The next step would be to swap over all these parts from the old needle to the new needle. So we have a washer, this plastic washer. So we just slide that off. Go ahead and slide that back on the new one. The new needle came with its own E-clip, so pop that on. Slide that nylon washer up there. The new washer underneath and above. Back the way it was before it came apart. Slide that back in the diaphragm here. Slide. And then we're going to put this piece, this keeper part, back in there. You got to be really careful when you're putting these in there, because sometimes you can break those tabs inside. Alright, and you'll know if you put that together right, if there's a little bit of a springy action on the needle. So next we're going to reinstall this diaphragm and slide. I like to put just a little bit of WD-40 on that surface area. Wipe it with my finger. You don't want too much. Okay, and this only goes in one way. You gotta make sure the needle goes into that needle holder, needle guide rather. That slides nice and smooth all the way in there. Make sure that doesn't get caught up or anything, and super smooth. You want to make sure this is sitting in the groove right there. We got an O-ring right here. I don't think it actually technically serves a purpose, but I'll put it back. The spring. And then this cap only goes one way because there's a spot for where that O-ring is. So make sure you put it in the right way. So that spring fits around that guide right there. And that fits in there. Hold it on. Screws. Snug those up. Okay. Now I'm going to check for any parts I forgot, which I forgot one right here. So it happens. So I'm going to have to take this bowl off again. When you're doing a carburetor, you just got to take your time, pay special attention to detail, and take lots of photos. Put everything back exactly the way it was, but you also want to reference your owner's or your service manual to make sure everything's put together right from whoever worked on it last too. So you never want to trust exactly how it was put together last time, because you never know who worked on it. This guy goes right here. Okay. Bowl goes back on. So this is just a cable holder if there's cables nearby, or if you want to hold this into position or whatever, it's just there to hold cables. So we'll look it over, make sure we didn't forget anything. I like to set the idle so that there's ever so slight daylight peeking through the butterfly valve here. So that's good. This moves up and down, and I'll show you how to test if that's working properly. So you spray a little bit of compressed air, and that'll tell you if that diaphragm is working properly. Okay. Also, you want to make sure it retracts kind of slow too. So that's a properly working diaphragm and slide. So we got our choke, our air cutoff, idle, screw, float bowl, new gaskets, new jets. We set our mixer screw at 2 1/4, so when we fire it up and get it running, we're going to use that to tune the carburetor. And then last step, or put these hoses back where they were. So I gotta reference my phone again. Let's see. That goes like that. And this is just a vent line right here. So there we go. All set, ready to put back in the bike, get it running, see how it goes. Thanks for watching. Hope that helps. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Comment below or send me a private message. Thanks so much.